a friend does something that's quietly costing her, socially or otherwise, and you tell her, calmly, in good faith, without any agenda beyond wanting her to see it. Within a week, she's texting less. Within a month, she's found other reasons to be busy. Nothing was ever said about the conversation itself. It simply became the last thing that happened before the distance started. This is a pattern worth naming at the outset because once you see it, you stop being able to unsee it. People say they want honesty right up until honesty actually shows up at the door. Then it gets treated as an intrusion rather than a gift, sometimes even as an assault. The obvious question is why, and the obvious answer, the one every version of this topic reaches for, is that people are fragile and defensive and can't handle the truth. The answer isn't wrong, actually. It's just thin, and it doesn't explain why self-deception is one of the best documented, most stubbornly persistent features of the human mind, or why some of the psychologically healthiest people you know are also provably lying to themselves the most. As always, one thing before we start. I'm not a psychologist, a philosopher, or any kind of specialist in any related field. These are personal reflections, not professional counsel. They should be received as such, with interest perhaps, but also with a healthy degree of skepticism reserved for anyone who is ultimately just thinking out loud. Pretending, if I am to define it for the purpose of this monologue, is the maintenance of a version of reality that some part of the mind already knows to be false, about oneself, another person, or a situation. Self-deception is the machinery keeping that false version load-bearing. Denial, rationalization, minimization, projection, each a different tool for the same job. Punishing honesty is what happens to the messenger once that machinery gets threatened, distancing, mockery, semantic combat, quiet exile. None of this is about nitpicking, and it isn't a treatise on being cruel under the banner of honesty. It's about honest mirrors and the surprisingly reliable human tendency to smash them rather than adjust posture in front of them. When someone points out something, the nervous system frequently doesn't process it as information. It processes it as danger, specifically the danger of shame, rejection, or humiliation, and it reacts before the reasoning brain has any say. Defensiveness in that light isn't a failure of logic. It's the protective reflex arriving ahead of logic, the way a hand recoils from heat before the burn is even registered consciously. We as a species are designed towards negativity, towards defensiveness. It's enough to just imagine the caveman, the one that was suspicious and defensive, would live longer than the one that was optimist and went to pat the tiger on the head. The distinction that does the real work here is guilt versus shame. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, there is something wrong with me. Guilt isolates the offense from the self so the person can feel it and still like who they are underneath it. Shame doesn't isolate anything. It floods the whole self concept. Feedback that lands as shame doesn't get evaluated for accuracy because the system already filed it under emergency, and emergencies get responded to, not deliberated over. So that immediately becomes, I'm not rude, people are just too sensitive. I don't have a problem, they are just overreacting. And please do notice the structural symmetry. the discomfort gets relocated outward, so it never has to be metabolized inward. Once shame has hijacked the interaction, the most efficient way to protect the self-image isn't to examine the claim, is to eliminate the source of discomfort. For start, pretending not to understand, arguing over semantics until the point it dissolves into debate about wording, or flipping the script so the truth teller becomes the aggressor, and in the end, slowly, quietly, becoming unavailable. That's why I don't think this is mere pettiness. It's a survival strategy, however maladaptive, aimed at removing the perceived threat rather than confronting the wound that the threat exposed. Friendships that ran warm for years and cooled off almost overnight after one honest conversation. Family systems where a single person becomes the designated scapegoat, the difficult one, simply for saying aloud what everyone already knew and had tacitly agreed never to name. Here is where the intuitive story starts to complicate itself. Robert Trivers, the evolutionary biologist, built a theory around an unsettling proposition. People don't just deceive others despite deceiving themselves. They deceive themselves in order to deceive others more effectively. A liar who believes his own lie licks no tails. Confidence you've manufactured for yourself reads to everyone watching as confidence you actually possess. The salesman convinced his product is exceptional outsells the one privately certain it's mediocre and merely performing enthusiasm because performance leaves a signature and genuine belief doesn't. Run that logic through your own life and you will see things in a different light. The friend insisting she's not that bothered by a breakup she's clearly gutted by isn't only just protecting herself from pain, she's producing a version of herself more socially functional, more bearable to be around than the honest version would be. The self-deception isn't a bug in an otherwise rational system. It's frequently the load-bearing wall. In the late 1980s, psychologists Shelley Taylor and Jonathan Brown found something that inverts this whole discussion further. Mentally healthy people, by most standard measures, tend to hold mildly inflated views of themselves, their control over events, and their prospects relative to what accurate accounting would justify. The people whose self-assessments track closest to reality are disproportionately representative among the clinically depressed. Accurate self-perception, the thing usually treated as the unambiguous prize, correlates with worse outcomes than a well-calibrated illusion. None of this means that truth is worthless or that self-deception is costless. It means the honest mirror isn't unconditionally good in the way just be honest assumes, and the person insisting otherwise is working from folk psychology the data doesn't fully support. The psychiatrist Carl Jung offers a vocabulary that explains something the shame framework leaves slightly mysterious. While the conscious mind can sincerely believe it wants truth, while some other layer of the psyche works quietly and effectively to keep that truth from landing. In his view, the persona is the curated self, coherent, presentable, built for public consumption. Not fraudulent so much as a necessary simplification, the way a resume simplifies a person into something legible to a stranger. The shadow is everything the persona had to exclude to stay coherent. The laziness, the pettiness, the neediness, whatever didn't fit the story. The shadow doesn't disappear once excluded. It goes unconscious and stays active from down there, disowned but not gone. When someone names a truth belonging to your shadow, they are not handing you a neutral fact the way a stranger points out an untied shoe. They are threatening the seam between persona and shadow, the wall the whole constructed self depends on. The ego, the part that told you at dinner it values honesty above almost anything, has no idea any of this is happening beneath it, experiences the threat simply as danger, and reacts with total sincerity. Nobody is lying when they say, "I want honesty," and flinching from it 3 seconds later. Both statements are true, issued from two poorly connected parts of the same person. Jung called what happens next projection. The disowned trait gets relocated onto whoever is convenient, usually the one who has pointed it out. The friend who calls you controlling and gets called controlling in return may simply be watching their own shadow material return to them, gift-wrapped by the act of naming it. Jung laid most of this out in the archetypes and the collective unconscious, developed the shadow further in Aion, and for anyone put off by the density of the collective works, oversaw man and his symbols specifically to make the same material legible to a general reader. Know thyself was never the neutral, low-stakes project the phrase makes it sound like. Integrating the shadow means dismantling part of the persona to do it, and the persona is frequently the only structure holding a person together in public. The resistance to truth isn't stupidity, and it isn't really about the messenger. It is the psyche defending its own architecture against demolition, even when the ego on top of it has sworn total allegiance to honesty. Ask yourself honestly, what were you getting out of telling your friend the truth? Not what you consciously intended, what you actually got. There is a specific under-examined satisfaction in being the one who sees clearly while everyone else flinches, a moral theater where "I'm just being honest" doubles as "and therefore I'm the clear-eyed one here and you're not." Uninvited honesty isn't always a gift with no strings attached. Sometimes it's a status transaction and the recipient can feel the string even when the deliverer insists there isn't one. This doesn't mean that every honest observation is an act of aggression. It does mean the "why won't they accept my honesty" framing conveniently exempts the honesty giver from scrutiny, and that exemption does a lot of unexamined work in how satisfying this whole topic feels. Ask the harder question: was the timing yours to choose or theirs? If someone consistently distances after you speak, the explanation isn't always that they can't handle reality. Sometimes it's that you've made a habit out of handing people a diagnosis they didn't request and calling their discomfort proof of your own courage. Children raised where mistakes were met with shame or punishment absorb a durable lesson. Being wrong is not safe. Truth and danger fuse early enough that it stops feeling like a belief and starts feeling like a fact about the world. Decades later, and feedback registers as emergency and any truth teller as a threat. Not from stubbornness, but because wiring installed at 7 is still running the show at 40. Contrast that to a rarer household where correction was firm but not humiliating, where people raised there get a nervous system never taught to file truth under danger. This scales socially too. Families, friend groups, and workplaces often run on an unspoken treaty. Peace gets preserved by not naming what actually hurts, and the person who breaks it, even accurately, gets relabeled almost immediately as difficult, dramatic, and the accuracy of what they said is nearly irrelevant to whether the label sticks, because the label punishes destabilization, not inaccuracy. On top of that, we also have a cultural axis. Cultures of politeness and cultures of bluntness both like to claim the moral high ground, one insisting we are kind, the other insisting we are honest, and yet both can function as sophisticated avoidance strategies. Politeness can be a desiccated form of care, all form and no substance, a way of never actually touching anyone. Bluntness can be a performance of honesty that's really just aggression wearing a badge. Neither register guarantees real contact. Both are equally capable of repelling it, just dressed differently. The person maintaining the fiction stays looped in the same patterns because the correction never lands long enough to change anything. And their closest relationships end up structured around a strange demand. Love me, but don't look too closely. That's not sustainable indefinitely because intimacy and invisibility are eventually mutually exclusive. The person telling the truth accumulates a specific sort of exile, cast permanently as friction rather than information, choosing over and over between being fully honest and being fully included. The group gets short-term peace financed by long-term interest. Problems that go unnamed migrate underground and resurface larger later with fewer good options attached. I'm not describing a category of people separate from myself here. There are true things about my own life that took years longer to face than they should have, and many still do. And people who told me accurate, kind versions of those truths well before I was ready, whose lives I made harder for the offense of being right too early. Fluency with the theory buys almost nothing in the actual moment because the shame response doesn't check credentials before it fires. Not everyone can receive a given truth from you in this relationship at this time, and you are allowed to stop offering it without that being a failure. Some relationships are only sustainable at the level of pretending, and the real decision is whether that reduced version is worth keeping on those terms. Find a handful of people who can actually hold a mirror without flinching, because they do exist, and stop auditioning for the role of unpaid reality checker for the people who have already made their answer clear. Notice what your body does in the half second after someone says, "Can I be honest with you?" before you have even heard what follows. That bracing is data, not a character flaw. Practice the pause deliberately. I need to sit with this only counts if you actually do later, rather than use it as a polished exit. Do separate on purpose "I did something that hurts someone" from "I am something that shouldn't exist," because that separation is the exact hinge the shame response is built to obscure. A therapist, a journal, or one person trusted enough to hear the quiet truth out loud for the first time tends to do more than any amount of theory. You can protect a story that lets you function, or you can protect the possibility of becoming someone slightly more accurate than the story allows, and there is a real cost in either way. Because the story isn't pure delusion, it's often the thing holding you together well enough to get through the week. If you're the one who sees clearly, which relationships are you still bleeding into on the theory that one more honest sentence will finally land when the evidence already told you it won't? If you're the one who's been avoiding, what's the one thing you already know in full and have arranged your entire week around never having to look at directly? As always, beware the comfort of being right.